Hi, I'm going to do a very fast, very down and dirty demonstration of one of my currently favorite projects, which is Kubeless, which is Kubernetes native serverless. And I'm going to do it on top of Minikube. So let's go. First, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this function, but I'm going to deploy this function to my Kubernetes cluster. What this function does is it adds a search capability to a JSON feed. The JSON feed happens to be the status of bike share stations in Washington, D.C. So what I want to do is be able to just run this function without dealing with any of the deployment, any of the overheads of a normal deployment. So I'm going to do that with Kubeless. As you can see, here my Kubernetes dashboard, I don't have any deployments running. There's nothing running on here except for Kubeless right now. But that's about to change. First thing, let's issue a simple Kubernetes command, a Kubeless command, which is just to list all the functions that are up there now. As you can see, the Kubeless knows no functions. You can see here that I have that Python function that I was just showing you in the bikes.py file, which is just right here locally next to my in my Kubeless directory, just to make it a little easier to run the demo. So if I go back far enough, you'll see here's the command that I'm going to use to deploy the function. So I'm saying that Kubeless use the function command to deploy subcommand, name the function bike search, use an HTTP trigger, which means I'm going to make the function run by reaching over HTTP. I'm telling that the runtime is Python 2.7, that the handler, the actual function to run, is in the bikes module, and it's the function called find, and that the file is bikes.py. So as you can see here, the function's called find. All right, so I'm just going to hit enter, and then we can see that the bike search function is now available in the list of Kubeless functions. So if you want real quick to know, like, okay, what did that actually do to my Kubernetes cluster, we can just come over here and check out the dashboard. If I refresh it, you'll see that there's now a bike search. There's a bike search deployment, and then I can drill down from the deployment into the replica set, from the replica set into the pods and the service. And so I can see there's a pod and a service now. That's part of that. That's part of that deployment. So that was all handled for me automatically. All I had to say was to deploy the function, and the deployment with with all the other objects that it needs was automatically created for me. So now you may be wondering, how do I actually access the function, right? I want to run the function now. Well, all I really need is the URL for it, or the IP address. So how do I find that? Normally you could come here and find it in the services and use the IP address. Except I know that's not going to work because I'm using Minikube. Minikube kind of redirects everything. But I can just ask Minikube, what is the service? Whoops. And it lists out all the services that are available. And now I'm going to just grab the command here just to make sure that I don't make any errors. So now all I'm going to do is I'm going to curl that function. So if you look at the function again, the function takes a web request. It finds the term in the web request, term being a key, and then it takes the value from that key and tries to find it in the list of stations. And if it finds it, it adds it to a list. So this just says that to call term Albemarle, which is a street near my house. And then it says, Here's the IP address, which I'm just copying here from the bike search service. As you can see, the port change, so I'll just update it with the right port. And then when I hit enter, you should see that the function executed. So that's all I had to do to deploy my function and run it. All I had to do was deploy it and then just access it over HTTP. That is an HTTP trigger, triggered Kubeless function. Go on a little bit if we want to see some more interesting Kubeless functions. One of them is if you're just like developing and you want to try it out, but you don't really want to deal with figuring out where the IP address is and reach it that way, there's actually a nice command here that I will use. So this command, hold on a second. So this command, let me make it a little nicer. This command is Kubeless function call bike search, call the function name. So I know that there's a function name called bike search. I just add it, I just saw it in the list, and then pass the data. So this just simplifies everything. I don't have to know where the IP address is. I don't have to figure out the curl command and all those switches. And then when I hit enter, you can see that it just figures out for me where to call it, and it found all of the bike stations and returned all those JSON for all the bike stations that are on Wisconsin Avenue, which that is pretty cool. But now let's see what happens if I have a bug, which is pretty easy for me to make a bug. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass in the wrong key here. And so that shouldn't work. And you can see I get an error. So I triggered it over HTTP and it crashed. If you see, my function's pretty bad because there's no error handling of any kind. I didn't even check if the term was, if the key was available in the object. So that's pretty bad. But now how am I going to debug that? So there's a couple ways. I'm basically going to look at the logs. So first, since it's just Kubernetes, again, it's Kubernetes native. So now I can just use everything I know about Kubernetes to figure it out. So I'll just say Kubernetes get pods. There's only one pod. That makes it easy. Then I can say kubectl logs for that pod. And then I get the logs. And if I scroll back, then I can see right here that it couldn't find term. And I know that's because it had TRM, not TERM. Of course, another way that I could do it is I could come to the dashboard, click on the pod, and I could view the logs from here if I so desired, because again, it's just, there's one other quick little thing that I want to show you. If I go back to Minikube service list again, you can see that there's a service installed here called UI in the Kubeless namespace. So that's something pretty cool. Let's check that out. So I'm going to launch that service by saying Minikube service UI, and as you can see, it's in the Kubeless namespace. So I'll pass in -n Kubeless, which says defined in the Kubeless namespace. So if it was in a default namespace, I could leave that off, but I need to specify the namespace. Since it's in Kubeless, I'll hit enter, and that's going to open this cool GUI and editor that we have built into Kubeless. So I can click on the command. You can see that there's an editor here for the command. I can make different experiments for things to search for. For instance, I'll search for Calvert. And I'm going to post it. I run the function, and oops, I got a little error there. I'm not sure what I did wrong. Position 1. Actually, let me make sure I'm doing this right. Okay, let me just try it with Okay, we're back. For some reason, the screen recording quit. So I ran the function, and then I can see that the function worked. Then if I make the same or similar error and I run the function, nothing happened. And then I can just click here to get the logs. So it brings the UI brings everything together. And in fact, in this way, you can offer this programming ability to people who don't know anything about Kubernetes, and they can just start programming and writing functions. Now, just by way of closing, I'll show that there's actually different kinds of functions that you can write. So I'll click the new functions button, and this gives a dialog that you can use to create functions. So first of all, there's two types of functions. One is HTTP, which I'm just showing you. You trigger the function by hitting it over HTTP, but the other is pub sub, which actually means that the function can subscribe to events. The events happen to be Kafka events. That's a bit of an implementation detail, but essentially you can just subscribe to topics, and you can also trigger topics. So that's another way to trigger the functions. And then there's also this drop down here. You can say it says Node.js by default. I wrote a Python function, but right now we actually support Node, Ruby, and Python. So you can choose between those now. And of course you can add your own if you want. So I can make a Node one, for example. It'll just create a default one for me. Hold on, did something wrong. Oops, I forgot to add the all-important handler information. So create that. A hello world application for me. You can see that it's deploying it. It doesn't take any. Okay, I think I'm back again. The screen recording quit again, so now I think it's back up. So I'll hit the run function button, and then I can see that the function works, and then I can like iterate here and mess around with it. So that is like my down and dirty, super fast overview of Kubernetes native serverless programming using Kubeless, and also doing it just on my laptop with Minikube.